Well, so while we're talking about this, and we kind of talked a little bit just briefly before the show about the history of licensing. And, I talked about, I introduced with Dr. Scott Jensen, who had, a hit against his medical license. And he's the one that talked about states using licensing to weaponize. And when you look at the history, what happened during COVID, originally licenses started out, physicians were one of the first professions, or maybe the first, to get licensed. And now, everybody has to be licensed. Dog groomers, and, if you paint somebody's toenails, you need to be licensed. Well, look at what happened during COVID. The government shut those places down so they couldn't make an income. And they threatened them and said, well, you can go ahead and open up and do it yourself against our will, or against our recommendations, but we'll take your license. So can you discuss that about licensing?
Yeah. So, I think inherently the first start was, to your point, let's protect against quacks. I'm going to smash you in the head with a rock, and that's going to make you heal, right? We don't want that type of quote unquote medical treatment. But let me, I want to back up too, because that's a really critical point to the foundation of Silent Majority Foundation. As you mentioned, Shawn, you and I were introduced by some mutual friends. One of our directors, Rob Waits, grew up, in Moses Lake, and his dad. And before Silent Majority Foundation was born, I sit on Pasco City Council, and I brought a reopened Pasco ordinance, right? And this was in late 2020, early 2021, to basically say we're not going to allow the governor to shut down our business. Right. And so ultimately that failed. It didn't even get to the floor. But simultaneously, there's a place called Shakey's Pizza. And anyone familiar with the Pasco area? Yeah, exactly. I knew you'd nod your head. Road 68 and the highway, right? And
Dean.
Shakey. Yeah, Dean, exactly, Dean. And so Shakey's has a liquor license. It sells beer, sells pizza, it's other stuff, right? It's got games. It's a great place for families, so parents can grab a beer, kids can go play video games, and you get pizza. Like, it's Chuck E. Cheese, but for adults and kids. And so Dean contacts me and says, hey, man, my liquor license is under investigation. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, you selling bad beer? He's like, no, I told patrons they didn't have to wear a mask. So Liquor Cannabis Board came after me, and they're going to shut me down or fine me at $10,000 a day. And then we heard Labor and Industries, if you're familiar with Sterling's restaurant and a couple others, and I hope, they don't mind that I call them out by name, but, Labor and Industries and Liquor Cannabis Board came after their health licenses and then, their liquor licenses. To your point, licenses are there. If you look at the statutory history of Liquor Cannabis Board and what it's supposed to inspect for, it's one, are you over serving? Look, if you're blatantly drunk, I should not be serving you. Two, are you serving to minors? Yeah, if my 9-year-old kid goes in, gets hammered, and then rides her bike into Road 68, someone's going to die, right? Of course, we want that to not happen. But to tell me, or to tell Dean as a pizzeria owner, you're not telling your patrons to wear masks, so we're taking out a $10,000 a day penalty. Liquor Cannabis Board made that rule. Think about this, Shawn. The governor appointed someone to Liquor Cannabis Board. Liquor Cannabis Board makes an emergency rule valid for 120 days saying we're going to enforce the governor's order. We saw that with Chris Reichdahl, our state's public superintendent of public instruction, so our state superintendent. He said, I can enforce the governor's order. This whole licensing thing and enforcement mechanism has gone so overboard with COVID that whether it was something that was to protect people from the beginning, and now I'm just going back to licensing. I think licensing has its time and place. You don't want to continually relicense the habitual driving offender, right? If someone has 10 DUIs, you don't want to reissue them a license. If they're driving 125 and running over kids in school areas, you don't want to relicense that person. That was, I think we all believe that somewhere there was a benevolent intent. But now when you have these agencies and think it's not just goals, and then like an octopus, making sure it's got suction cups all the way around, and suction cups with spikes so it can suck you in and punish you simultaneously, right? And this administrative state has grown so burdensome that it's punishing us anywhere and everywhere that we disagree with the quote unquote mainstream thought. And I don't believe it's a mainstream thought. I believe it's a small minority imposing its will. And I know that kind of deviates and takes us away from your original question, but I think licensing has been so weaponized by our government. We have to peel it back. I worked on a Republican governor's campaign. It was Josh Freed. And I told Josh, I said, look, I have no interest in going to Olympia, but if you're elected, I want you to hire me as your LCB and your LNI and your Department of Ecology, your heads, right? I want you to hire me and fire me within a year, because my goal, Josh, is to take the burden off you, and I will go through and just gut these regulations. Because the problem, Shawn, is that the legislature says ecology can do 1, 2, 3, 4. And oh, by the way, number 5 is whatever you believe is necessary to achieve your goal. So we have a lazy legislature that's abdicating its authority. And I think we need to sue the legislature on that. They should never write a blanket check to an agency saying, oh, a number 5 is whatever needs to be done. You know what? That agency needs to either go back to the governor or back to the statute that creates it and ask the legislature, hey, you know what? You really... Department of Ecology, we need to, there are noxious weeds that are fire threats. We need to regulate those in these 10 counties. Now that's a reasonable thing, right? Okay, noxious weeds are a fire threat. We've seen historic fires. We've seen this. Let's regulate that, but not just anything you think is necessary. And so between a lazy legislature and between a power grab of these people who have been appointed by Jay Inslee, who just believe they can do whatever they want to rule the world, licensing has been so weaponized. It's taken the ability for people like you and I to operate as we should.